Adams and her settlement house movement, pushing for that care for the poor and the impoverished in cities. All right. Let's talk about labor unions. Why are they forming at this time?
To protect the rights of the workers.
Very good. Protect the rights of the workers. Concerned about low
Wages and high hours.
long hours, dangerous conditions. Of course, one of the goals would be to have a day that was how long? 8-hour day. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, 8 hours for what we will. There'd be concern that during economic downturns that wages were cut and yet the jobs remain the same. You might have a concern if you had a company town and that your rents were being maintained even as your wages were cut, like in the Pullman town. Right? Some of the unions to be familiar with. We did have that National Labor Union, a briefly lived organization. That's not on your paper there. Some that would last a bit longer. You'd have the Knights of Labor. The Knights of Labor, of course, incorporating many different groups, skilled and unskilled workers, women, men, minority groups. With this inclusiveness, though, the Knights of Labor would not advocate what tool to change things. Violence and strikes. Right? They would oppose strikes officially, although some local members of the Knights of Labor occasionally did engage in strikes. They preferred arbitration, education, discussion as a means of achieving their goals, all right, under the leadership of Terence Vincent Powderly. Of course, the Knights of Labor, their end is oftentimes associated with what event?
Haymarket.
Very good. The Haymarket riot, when they are associated with the violence that occurs there, as well as some of the structural problems within the Knights of Labor leads to their decline. The American Federation of Labor, they still exist to this day as part of something called the AFL-CIO. The American Federation of Labor deriving some strength from the fact that they only organize what group? Skilled workers. So that gave you some leverage, some power. If you went on strike, you would be more difficult to do what?
Replace.
All right? And so that is one reason why their leadership, Samuel Gompers, organized the skilled workers. We oftentimes would say they organized various craft unions. If you were skilled at a particular craft, that's who they would organize first, turning them in from oftentimes local groups into national groups. When we talked about the groups or the goals of the American Federation of Labor, we oftentimes say they were engaged in bread and butter unionism, tangible things, 8-hour day, higher wages. They also want to negotiate as a group, meaning they wanted what type of rights?
Bargaining.
Collective bargaining rights. So they're pushing for that right to collectively bargain. Also pushing for a closed shop, that anyone who worked at a particular place must be a member of a union. And then we'll have the industrial workers of the world. Technically, they're outside the time frame of period 6, but I mentioned them here. They'll rise around 1905. More associated with radical ideology, socialism. We'll talk a bit more about them when we get to our role play, some of their leadership, like Big Bill Haywood discussing ideas of socialism, but I thought them worth throwing in on this list as they are kind of rising along the same time period. All right. Now, I gave you some examples of some strikes to be familiar with. What we're going to frequently find, will these strikes end in success or failure? Failure for the workers, at least. All right. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877. See this occur in the face of the continued economic downturn of the 1870s. As railroads are failing, they cut the wages of the workers while demanding more from them. Workers in several northeastern cities start to riot. And of course, we will see federal troops brought in to suppress those riots, to protect the property of the railroads. The Haymarket riot, 1886, there, the McCormick Reaper factory, workers were on strike while pushing for an 8-hour day. They would engage in some violent conflict with some scabs, some strike breakers coming in. The police would come in, injuring some of the workers on strike. A meeting was called at the Haymarket Square in Chicago. The meeting seemed to be going well. The police arrived, though. A bomb is thrown at the police officers. Violence erupts. People are injured and killed. Those who organized the Haymarket Square meeting are arrested and sentenced to death. All right. With this, association with violence and radical ideas, as some of the organizers were anarchists, this leads to a decline in the popularity of labor unions. People really not looking to support violent anarchists, even though to some extent the leadership there wrongly associated with some of that violence. Homestead steel strike, in this case, Andrew Carnegie's underling, Henry Clay Frick, expanding hours, cutting pay to keep the Homestead steel plant profitable, leads his workers to go on strike. Of course, as we said, the Pinkertons are brought in. There's violent conflict there. After the Pinkertons are repelled, the state militia comes in. Pinkerton's not held accountable for any of the violence. And we will also see in this case, being associated with radical ideologies hurts the union when an anarchist by the name of Alexander Berkman attempts to kill Frick. That leads to a loss of popular support for the Homestead steel strikers, and we'll see that strike end after 6 months without any improvement in pay or working conditions. The Pullman strike, of course, George Pullman ran his company town. Very restrictive. Again, in the 1890s, we'll see another panic. Workers' wages are cut. Rents remain the same in the company town. Workers go on strike. We'll see the American Railway Union, the ARU, encourage the strike by boycotting any Pullman cars, not touching them when they arrived at train stations. We'll see a court-ordered injunction against the strike to stop it as a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, that the disruption of mail delivery and rail travel was a restraint of trade. And that will lead to the Pullman strike being ended, and also leads to the arrest of Eugene V. Debs, who will turn to socialism. Brian?
What would it violate? I thought it was an interstate commerce.
No, Sherman Antitrust. Because they engaged in restraint of trade, they would say.
Oh, because the trust were
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, this is something we talked more about in the last unit, but incorporated here as well, the notion of the New South. And we said this is the idea that the South was also undergoing somewhat change in industrial development, but certainly not on the size and scale that we would associate with the North. All right, the South will still predominantly be associated with what?
Agriculture.
Agriculture, and in particular the development of what replacement of slavery, if you will?
Oh.
Sharecropping, very good. All right, so we'll continue to see the use of sharecropping and tenant farming in the South. All right. New systems of production, transportation enabled consolidation within agriculture, which, along with periods of instability, spurred a variety of responses from farmers. All right, what the heck does that mean? So, well, we're going to see new systems of production, new technologies, not only in the field of industry, but also in the field of agriculture.
Outstanding.
Yeah, outstanding in their field like farmers. All right. Transportation, of course, we see the rise of what? Railroads. All right. Consolidation within agriculture would suggest that not only are we going to see some corporate power in industry, but we're also going to see some corporate power in farming as well, which some independent farmers might have some concern about, not only the concern of railroad corporate power, but also some corporate power within farming. Periods of instability, those economic panics, certainly will hurt farmers, especially out west. You might also face the troubles with weather, wiping out your crops, making it difficult for you to pay back your debts. All right, so mechanization leads to a decline in food prices. Why is that? Mechanization might allow you to do what?
Less workers, more food.
All right, increased production, which in the result declines in the value that you might get for your crops. All right, things like the McCormick Reaper, the John Deere steel plow. All right. Yes. If I weren't on videotape right now, I might make some joke about John Deere being just a clothing line in Nassau, but no, they also engage in some. Oh, that's the oh, geez. All right, so see things like barbed wire. All right, barbed wire